Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for attending this month's edition of our 2021 webinar series. I'm Mayor Jim Carruthers of Traverse City, Michigan, and I will be moderating today's webinar. This month, we're excited to bring you two guests, experts, who will speak on the American Rescue Plan Act, specifically in regard to the ways local municipalities can access and secure funds through the plan. For today's agenda, we'll first hear from guest speaker David Goldwater from Stantec, and then John Dickert from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. Then we'll open the floor for questions from you, which we hope will help you get the answers you need to secure critical funds for your community's future. As a quick housekeeping note, we'd like to ask that everyone please mute your video and audio while our guests are speaking to limit any distractions. So to get started, I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker, David Goldwater. David is the Vice President and Senior U.S. Policy Advisor for Stantec and leads the U.S. policy team where he manages legislative, regulatory, and public policy changes at the federal, state, and local levels. Additionally, he supports client relations, strategic pursuits, and corporate marketing and branding efforts across North America. Prior to serving in this role, David spent a large portion of his career in the water sector with a focus on combined sewer overflow and wet weather markets, where he led business development and strategy for the firm's 26th Eastern region. Throughout his career, he has focused on clean water policy and water affordability in partnership with the United States Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities, National Association of Clean Water Agencies, and the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. Thank you for joining us, David.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it very much. I will go ahead and share my screen here. Sure. Make sure this is working here. All right. Can everybody see the screen at this point? Yes, good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today, everybody. We are going to chat a little bit about the American Rescue Plan Act and specifically focus on the state and local fiscal recovery funds that were a part of that act. I'm going to, run through a small bit of slides, and then obviously at the end, we want to leave plenty of time for some Q&A and discussion around these issues. So thank you. Make sure they're working. There it goes. So overview of the state and local fiscal recovery funds. $350 billion in funding was provided through the Rescue Plan Act to state, local, and tribal governments, really to assist in responding to COVID impacts, as well as a few other allowables. We'll talk through those on the next couple of slides. There are four main buckets that were provided as allowable through the Rescue Plan Act, and then clarified through the interim final rule that was issued by the U.S. Treasury Department on May 10th. That interim final rule, which many of you have probably reviewed in detail, provides for the frameworks and the types of programs and further guidance that was not provided with great clarity in the rescue plan. It also provides for a 60-day public comment period, which began on May 10th and will end on and around July 10th. As part of that, the Treasury is really asking for significant input from mayors, from communities, with questions surrounding eligibility for potential uses for these funds. When they do that, they are not just asking for comments, they're also asking you to A, keep them short and sweet, but B, tell them the answer. They want you to give them guidance as to what you want the answer to be, not for them to tell you what the answer should be. Can't promise you they're going to give you what you want, but they certainly want you to tell them what you're hoping their response will be. So quick timeline with regards to The state and local funds, the act was passed through Congress and signed into law on the 11th of March. On May 10th, guidance was released by Treasury. May 11th, some of the initial funds to non-entitlement communities, to entitlement communities and states started to receive the first funds, depending on whether they were early action adopters of requesting those funds. And then they've been coming in over the last couple of weeks to both entitlement communities and to states. All of the non-entitlement communities under 50,000 are receiving their states, their funds through the state that they are based in, and should be receiving those. As you can see, you should be receiving those. The law from Congress and then the guidance that was initially provided by the Treasury required that within 30 days of the state receiving their funds, they had to transfer those funds to the non-entitlement communities. That has created somewhat of a problem because there are a number of communities that weren't ready for this. There also was a little bit of non-information provided on the front end about the process, and that this money isn't just automatically deposited into the community's bank deposits. They actually have to get on with the state and request those funds. You provide a DUNS number and actually fill out some other forms with regards to tracking those funds. So I can tell you that the National League of Cities and U.S. Conference of Mayors have been in contact with Treasury, and Treasury is expected to issue something in writing in the coming days, but the response that has been provided to National League of Cities yesterday, and I received word last night, is that reasonable extension requests for transfer of funds will be granted. They just want to make sure that a state doesn't receive the funds for non-entitlement communities and just sit on them, right? They want to make sure they get where they're supposed to go and that they are providing the benefit that is so needed to every one of the cities and towns in the United States that's been impacted by COVID. So that was the real driver for the 30 days, was to protect municipalities, but we've also realized in the actual application that it's been a little bit more difficult than originally anticipated to get those funds into everybody's hands. So a couple of other things, uses. I'm going to go through this stuff very quickly because we're all here to talk about water and wastewater issues. That's the real focus for this group today. But there are four main buckets, as we talked about: public health and economic hardship issues, support for essential workers is an allowable use for these funds, revenue shortfalls. I'm certain that almost every city and town in the United States had a fairly significant revenue shortfall due to lack of, sales taxes, due to lack of a whole enormous amount of things that didn't happen during COVID and drop down revenues. People weren't paying property taxes. People weren't paying other taxes and other fees within the community because they've lost jobs. So revenue shortfalls is anticipated as a wide use for a lot of communities. And then lastly, the Treasury and the White House and Congress wanted to be very thoughtful as Congress passed this law, and also encourage things that will help with investment in the community, put people back to work. Not that the other three categories can't help with those as well, but also, a spotlight for the first time in a long time was really put on the critical path needs of providing clean water. Nobody could wash their hands if they didn't have clean water in their house. And so as part of that, they wanted to allow a very, very broad open-ended use for water and sewer and broadband infrastructure. Water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure do not have to have a direct tie back to anything directly COVID related. So it doesn't have to say that, hey, we couldn't invest in this, new upgrade to our treatment plant because of COVID. It's just, hey, we need to make upgrades to our treatment plant to ensure the consistency and level of service of clean water or wastewater services to our community, and that is an allowable use. So further guidance was provided that included stormwater infrastructure, included a call out for green infrastructure, included a call out for climate resilience, as well as a specific focus on lead service line replacement. As really good broad guidance, the Treasury and Congress provided eligible project rules and regs would be easiest to define by looking at eligible project under clean water and drinking water SRF funds. So if you look under clean water and drinking water SRF and where those allowable charges and potential project uses are, anything that is allowed under those programs would also be allowed for eligible uses. But certainly there are some that are going to be outside of traditional clean water and drinking water SRF that would still be allowable. So again, if there are questions, you still have time, roughly a month, to ask questions and guidance for Treasury to ensure that you are utilizing the funds in a way that is an eligible use, because the back end, there is a potential provision for clawback from the federal government if funds are used in a way that was not eligible by the law that was enacted. So certainly everybody wants to avoid that potential pitfall. Prohibited uses that were very clearly designated in the Rescue Plan Act. States and territories may not use the funds to offset any kind of reduction in tax revenue or to implement a tax increase, right? So if they wanted to offset a potential increase in taxes or a potential increase in water and wastewater rates or anything like that, they cannot be used to offset a reduction in taxes. They may not be used for direct, backfill of pension funds, legal settlements. They also cannot be used for non-federal match of a federal funded project. And lastly, there is guidance that was added, and Treasury, I will tell you, on a weekly basis is updating the FAQ on their website, the frequently asked questions, to answer constant questions that are coming in. One of the major questions by one of the member communities here, Mayor Lightfoot, asked recently was around the ability to use these funds to pay back debt service on loans that were taken out in order to ensure continuity of city services during COVID. The answer that was provided by Treasury on the website, and that was fairly clear in the intent in the law, was that that is not allowed, that it cannot be used to pay down debt, which is unfortunate because so many communities did have to take out other loans or bonds in order to ensure continuity of services. But what it does allow in the act is for you to be creative and utilize these funds in a forward-looking way to pay for city services on a go-forward basis and ensure continuity of service, and also economic development impact, benefits, helping bring back shuttered businesses. All of those kinds of things are allowable uses. So while there was a few significant restrictions, there also are a lot of broad-based opportunities for use of these funds. The other huge thing to note, anybody that receives funds and requests them, you are not required to request funds or to take the funds by any means. It is up to the city or town to request the funds. And additionally, they did it in two different buckets. So half of the funds were released on or around the 11th of May, and going forward, the other half are anticipated. They haven't put a firm date out there, but the anticipation is very early part of 2022, i.e. the first quarter of next year is when they anticipate releasing the second half of that $350 billion. So there are some reporting requirements that are covered in the guidance as well as in the law that cities should be very clear to make sure that they are following those reporting requirements. Again, if there are questions, Treasury is available for assistance and guidance. So there are some things that are still out there that have been asked that we're still waiting to hear final requirements. There will be some issues that they've taken a little longer, Treasury has taken a little longer to answer, and those will be included in the final rule when it comes out in roughly another 30 days. But, you know, these are a couple of questions that we know we're still kind of waiting on final clarification on. And, you know, there's been some questions around transportation needs, if it's for economic development, right? We're going to provide transit and spend money on transit in order to service a business district that was hit hard by COVID in order to help it revitalize. You know, we think those are all allowable uses, but they aren't explicit in the law. And so there are some unanswered questions that we hope will be clarified through updates from Treasury, as well as in the final interim or the final rule as it comes out. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we will turn it over to the next presenter and then leave open some time for questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David, for your insightful presentation. And as you said, before we turn to our question and answer session, we're going to hear now from one more guest speaker, John Dickert. In 2019, John was appointed to serve in his current role as the Minister of State and Local Finance for the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. Prior to this role, he served as the longtime mayor of Racine, Wisconsin, and later became the president and CEO of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. While mayor, John served as president of the Urban Alliance, a group of mayors from Wisconsin's largest metro regions, in addition to serving in the United States Conference of Mayors as both a vice chair of the Metro Economies Committee and member of the Mayor's Water Council. In his current role, John works closely with the American Rescue Plan Act and has great insight into how municipalities can obtain these funds, as well as how they can strategically apply funding to critical infrastructure. Thank you, John, for your time today, and it's great to see you.
Thanks, Mayor. It's great to see you again, Jim. It really is. I do have to say that I miss you all very, very much. Some of the greatest years of my life were having the opportunity to serve as mayor and work with all of you, some of the best and hardest working people on the planet. So thank you for what you're doing. I know you're doing great work, and we appreciate everything you do. We really do. So now I have transferred over to working for the Department of Revenue. The governor asked to have me come on board and work with the state and local finance division. So we have a division of 120 staff, 5 offices around the state, and we work with all taxing jurisdictions in the state of Wisconsin. So all 1,951 taxing jurisdictions of counties, cities, villages, towns, and school districts. So to say the least, we're working with a lot of folks. We put out about $1.4 billion in aid every year. So when the money came down from the federal government, the governor asked if we would take over, our group is called the SLF, State and Local Finance. He asked if SLF would implement the funding and make sure that it got to the local communities. We are doing that. And let's start out a little bit with what that's all about. Many of the cities, many of you received your funds straight away from the federal government. You were either big enough or you were part of the CDBG formula so that you got your money right away. Everybody 50,000 and lower that were not part of the CDBG formula package are getting it probably from your states. I will ask you to respond when I get done if you don't mind, but I would like to know from the states outside of Wisconsin what your deadline is currently to get your information in to receive your funds, if what you're called an NEU, which is a non-entitlement group, that you have a deadline, I'm assuming like we do in Wisconsin. I'd just like to get an idea for the different states as to what the NEUs are using for deadlines. So our deadline here in Wisconsin, there's 1,821 NEUs, and our deadline is this Friday. So tomorrow we have been working with the folks, and we took the information. Oh, there's the Honorable Mike Vandersteen. Hello, Mayor. So the state, as soon as the state asks for the money, and ours asked the federal government for the money on May 28th. As soon as they do that, the 30-day clock starts. And in that 30 days, we are asked to put the money out to all those 1,821 municipalities. However, the federal government came in and said, by the way, we need you to have all of these different criteria items that you have to meet before you can send out the money to them. So we had to put together a full plan in doing that and getting that information and making sure it's the right information, because we have to keep track of it. So by this Friday, our first wave, that's our first deadline. By Friday, our first wave will be getting, whoever files by that Friday will be getting their checks out within 7 days. Then after that, there'll be a second wave of people who have hit some of the challenges that they've hit throughout this process, like trying to apply for a DUNS number with the federal government and being told that it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks to get your DUNS number. So that would obviously push them out of the 30-day deadline. And we've told the federal government that we need some flexibility to make sure that those people are taken care of. So really, there's two things that are happening here. There is the sprint, which if you're a runner, there's the sprint and the marathon. The sprint is the portion where we are actually putting out the information. Then the communities request us to send them the information, and then we put the information out. We get the money out to them. Then the marathon is the next 3 years. Once they get the funds, that they have that 3 years then to obligate the money or appropriate the money. Those 3 years, we will be looking at the final guidance that the federal government puts out and determining how they can spend that money. Now, there's a couple things that we would ask, those organizations to look to do, especially yourselves as cities. Make sure that you are getting a hold of Treasury, as David said earlier, and informing them of what you want to spend the money on and what is important to you to spend the money on. Because let's be honest, the Treasury is going to look at all these guidance conversations. They're going to figure out probably the ones that are most requested, and they may be providing flexibility in that space. So if you have what you think the funds are too limited, make sure you tell Treasury what you'd like to see it being able to be spent on. And then we look to now, in the next 3 years, build this new normal, whatever it is. So we have the sprint and the marathon, and that's how we're talking to our people in Wisconsin, those two items. Now, also remember that while the obligating or spending the funds goes till 2024, you have until 2026 for that project to get done. So for instance, if you're doing a water infrastructure project, maybe with another community, and you're cost sharing that project, you can obligate that money in 2024. That project may not get done until 2026, but that still fits in within the boundaries of what you're looking at doing. So once Friday is done and we get these folks in and we get the majority of them, if not the vast majority of them, in to ask for their money, then we are going to start, we're actually pulling one of our former colleagues on board, the former mayor of Appleton, Tim Hanna, who decided to retire after 6 terms. And he's going to be coming on board with us. And we're going to go out throughout Wisconsin, and we're going to start talking to these local municipalities of, number one, what to spend the project money on, or the funds on. And number two, how to think about it the way we as mayors have always thought about it, which this is really one-time money like we've never had before. I mean, I know some of you have been around for a while, and I was around for a little while myself, but the fact is, we have never seen this kind of money from the federal government. So what we're asking people to do is to look at those long-term issues that you can utilize this on, whether it's water, sewer infrastructure, clean drinking water, whether it's rebuilding your cities in broadband or security. No matter what it is, we're asking people to look at those long-term things that you've never had the money to spend, or things that are going to provide you a better in this new future, whatever this new future is going to look like for us, because things have changed significantly. So planning. If you can, look at your planning documents, your long-term strategy plans, and find out if there's any relationship building you can do here to do some things. But you already know that, right? You folks are way ahead of us on this. Our role is going to be in coordinating in this and trying to bring together the local units' desires the state priorities, and then not only the federal priorities, but the second wave, which is the federal infrastructure bill. So we're asking our communities to not only look at your priorities and the state priorities and see if we can mesh those up to utilize the funds to build a better Wisconsin, but we're also looking at how can we, if we don't have enough money to do a major project, maybe you need to build a new wastewater treatment plant. Maybe you need to build that wastewater treatment plant because you want to do a major development in your community. Does that fit into the infrastructure project on the bill that's coming out of Washington, D.C.? So that's why we talk about the priorities between the mayors, the state, and DC. The last thing I'll ask you to think about is the equity side of this. As we're rebuilding our communities and as we're rebuilding the states, that we're creating those equity issues that people that have been hardest hit, we're taking care of those items so that they're not hit even harder going forward. Let me give you an example. Lead pipes. In our community right now, we have a program, but it's a 50-50 match on lead pipes. Well, if you build a revolving loan fund or actually even just fund them straight out, if you take that cost to somebody to replace their lead pipes out of the equation, the person that can't afford it most is going to appreciate that the most because they don't even have the cost share money most likely. So then now we're not only replacing our lead pipes, but we're taking that off of the water sewer fee and maybe off of your capital fee going forward, capital project fee. So we're going to ask people to look at those things, but really we're going to be out in Wisconsin to try to rebuild this new future with you, to create these relationships and get people focused on those big ticket items that are important. And there is no issue more important right now than clean water. So I'd like to open it up to Q&A, and I'll turn it back over to John.
Oh, thank you, John.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you, John. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge about the American Rescue Plan Act. Before we go to questions, we'd like to share a few additional resources that might be helpful to you in this process. If you have specific questions regarding your state's process to obtain funds, please take a moment to review this slide and jot down the respective contact for your state. While you're doing this, we'd also like to direct you to a resource that outlines the specific state and local allocations under the rescue plan, which we will share in the chat. And I'm sure we could also send copies of these to everybody who's in attendance and to all of our local mayors. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our mayors to ask any questions you may have related to the rescue plan. Because we have a small group today, please feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat function to pose a question to David or John. If anybody has a question, you can speak up or add it to the chat. I think a question to get us started might be, considering recent conversations on Capitol Hill, do you think that future rescue plan funding is in danger?
I'll start with that one. So there has been a request made by some of the members of Congress in the current infrastructure negotiations to utilize some or all of the second half of funding from the rescue plan to fund infrastructure. The White House, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and National League of Cities have all come back saying that that is a non-starter. There is an additional discussion that has taken place in the last few days in Congress about utilizing other CARES Act and COVID relief money that was not part of the rescue plan going to states and cities and towns, but other unencumbered money that has not yet been doled out to help fund the infrastructure. And that has had a bit of a more warm reception from the White House. But right now, the White House, the National League of Cities, U.S. Conference of Mayors, NACO have all come back and said clawing back any of the rescue plan money to the state and locals is a non-starter. So I'm hopeful that that will not happen.
Yeah, and Mayor, what we're hearing from the state side is that we have been very clear about the fact that you made a promise to these communities. And while you may be giving the money to them in 2 tranches, you made a promise to these communities. And that's an obligation that you financially have to keep. So that any conversation about withdrawing that money is a non-starter with us, in the sense that if we have to have conversations with our folks on the legal side at DOJ, we will, but you have made an obligation to the state of Wisconsin and its residents, and you have to live up to that obligation. Unfortunately, our state house we have a Democratic governor and 2 Republican houses in the Senate and the Assembly. They have been using options such as taking away the gubernatorial priorities in the budget and then supplementing them with ARPA funds, which, while there's no authority to do that, what it really means is that you're zero summing out the governor's priorities. The other thing that they've done is they've said that they're looking at legislation, and I know they've talked about drafting. I don't know that I've seen it yet. That would take away shared revenue completely and supplement it with ARPA funding. Well, that's a non-starter for the governor as well, simply because of the fact that shared revenue gets paid out every year, and that's a historical payout. That's not something that just came up the other day. That's been going on forever in Wisconsin. So these are things that people have been doing to try to get in essence, their hands on ARPA. But the governor makes the decision on the ARPA funds that he gets, the $2.5 billion at the federal level that he gets for Wisconsin. But the local communities make the decision on what they do with their ARPA money. And that's a lesson that we learned from 2009, 2010. That's where it should go, direct send to the local communities. So we feel that the conversation in Washington and the conversations that are happening in the state levels are all just political fodder for, stories in newspapers. But when it really comes down to it, this is your money. You're going to determine according to guidance on how to spend it.
Thank you. And I believe you both touched on this, but can you remind us again how fast we need to apply to make sure we don't lose these funds?
Sure. So if anybody that is in a different state, including yourself, Mayor, can tell me if they have been given a deadline, because once the state applies for the funds, and if you are an NEU, if you already got your funds, then no worries. But if you're an NEU, your state should have informed you of the 30 days that you have in order to meet the requirements and ask for the funding itself. Has anybody else got any days outside of our time frame? We asked for our money on May 28th, and on Friday, that's their last day for application for the first round.
All right, thank you. If anybody has comment or would like to answer that, they could do so directly or add that to the chats.
Yes, Mayor, and further to clarify John's comments from Wisconsin to other states, we are hearing from Treasury that they are going to allow some flexibility and requests for extension. So they have not put that out in writing, and they also have not said exactly what a firm deadline is going to be. I do know that the state of Minnesota has asked for at least a 30-day extension from Treasury. To my knowledge, that request has not yet been answered. But what we are hearing through National League of Cities is that they do intend to allow for reasonable requests for extensions. The other thing I do want to point out that John pointed on very clearly, and I neglected to discuss in my comments, is just, once you receive the funds, take some time and be really, really thoughtful and diligent about what you want to do with those funds. You don't have to make a decision tomorrow. You have until December 31st, 2024 to obligate those funds, and another 24 months to spend them. So while you have needs, and we know that this money is important to all the communities, take a little bit of time and really understand all the options and think through it. Because quite frankly, Treasury, the White House, and Congress, while they provided 4 allowable primary uses for these funds in 4 different buckets of areas, what they didn't do is tell you how to prioritize and give you any help on understanding how do we rank or think about things. That is entirely up to the flexibility of the community, how you want to use them, where the best use is, which is a good thing. They listen to communities, because the biggest thing that they were hearing from all of you that are on the phone up into the White House and into Congress was, don't give us another ARRA where our hands are tied. Give us flexibility. And so they've tried to give a lot of flexibility, which is good.
So you've been speaking to the flexibility of these funds. We understand that not a lot of communities are requesting funding from the rescue plan for water programs. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, or will this hurt us further in communities that don't apply for any of the funds available?
So we have heard that communities are requesting or looking at uses in the first tranche of funding, the first half of the funding, that are less focused on water. You don't specifically have to make a request on which of the 4 areas that you're going to use funds for. You just request the funds. So, and then you'll do a report later that says how the funds were used, but you're not asked to provide a written understanding or any specific usage on the front end with the request for funds. So that, again, giving you flexibility. We have heard that, Mayor, and it does concern all of us that there has been a lot of chatter around that says, hey, you're going to get money in this infrastructure package when it passes through Congress. You'll get money for water and wastewater through that. Don't use it for this. Yes, there's likely to be an infrastructure bill passed in Congress. It's likely to be significant. But what it won't be is a direct grant to your community. It's going to be used, more than likely, it's going to, as it always has in the history of this country, come through existing programs, which tends to be low interest loans through things like WIFIA, clean water and drinking water SRFs. So it isn't going to be direct grants. It's going to have significantly more encumbrances on it and requirements than you are with this money. So we are hopeful, as I'm talking to lots of mayors around the country, that the second half of money that is received for communities will maybe lopside the other way and more money towards water and wastewater infrastructure as well. But you are very correct, Mayor, that the information we are hearing back from communities is that largely they aren't utilizing it or allocating it for water wastewater at this time.
Yeah, Mayor, and one of the things that we're talking to our folks about is, through the years, we have heard from various administrations that you need to make sure that you're meeting your phosphorus levels at wastewater plants. You need to make sure that you're getting your drinking water clear of microbeads and PFAS, and you need to make sure that you're going to do X, Y, and Z so you don't get a consent decree. And all of those things are usually items that we either can't afford or we have to do 20-year bonding on. What we're talking to our folks about, and we will start more after Friday, is that this is the one time, as David said, it's a one time where we can actually sit back, talk to our neighboring communities in our regions, and have a conversation about utilizing these funds to actually start rebuilding for a new tomorrow. And this is a new norm. We're all in it. We're all stuck in it. But this funding, if not wasted, because I've heard from a number of people who say, I'm just going to give it to the nonprofits and the heck with it because I don't want to deal with all the work. Well, you've got 3 years to do that work, and you could do some major infrastructure work here, even if you just got it to the point where you bring in some consultants and some engineers to prep the project. And then when the infrastructure bill does come in, then start applying for those bigger dollars. Whatever the case is, anything that you can do to start building at this time with this money, I think is going to go a lot farther for you and your residents than people just kind of throwing it out there and letting it go where it may.
Let's see, what do we have anything? Yes, you're showing the slides. Is this our only opportunity with the rescue plan? Will there be other funding sources, say through the American Jobs Act, available to us or to the cities? Do you know of?
Well, I'll let David get to that, but I will tell you, our expectation is, use these funds wisely and try to build towards the infrastructure bill, because after that, I don't think you can count on anything. Our debt level at the national level is pretty high. I don't know that there's going to be a big appetite. Plus, the economy is coming back at a fairly reasonable pace, and so is COVID, except for the phase 2 in Europe and South America. But we're not expecting any more than this. Our numbers in Wisconsin have been higher in the amount of money that we actually made, tax revenue coming in, than we've had in a long, long time. That's primarily through manufacturing. So we don't expect anything new coming forward outside of the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think, a couple of things that we'll touch on real quickly here. A is, as John said, make sure that we're being really thoughtful about how to use these funds, and certainly infrastructure is one. Again, it's something that isn't requiring you to take a loan out, and so it is truly a direct grant to your community, and there are a lot of uses that you can use it for, and we don't want to make light of first responders and healthcare needs and some of those things, because those are critical path. But the worst thing that can possibly happen is that 1 penny of this dollar, the dollars that went to communities in the 350 billion, doesn't get used. That would be the worst, and it gets returned back to the federal government. That we need to avoid. So we need to think about that. When we talk about the president's jobs plan, $2.2 trillion is probably never going to get anywhere close to that. There are some great ideas and initiatives in the president's jobs plan. The Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate have come together and said, look, especially the Republicans have come across the aisle and said, look, if there is an infrastructure package that is put out that is truly infrastructure only, water, wastewater, roads, bridges, transit, broadband, we will pass that. We will work with you to get something through. We understand the importance of that and the job creation opportunities. Obviously, we saw the White House and Senator Capito's negotiations fall apart a week ago, but we now have 20 Democratic senators and 11 Republican senators that are working off in the sideline that have come together, and those numbers are inching up every day of people who are joining that group in the Senate to try and put a final infrastructure package together. We also saw the surface transportation bill pass out of the House Infrastructure Committee. We saw the Senate vote on portions of the surface transportation bill that would likely all go into the infrastructure final bill. I am fairly, and this is me speaking as an individual human being, not Stantec, but on behalf of the industry, I am fairly confident we will get a good infrastructure package. You saw the US Senate put out and pass through the Senate a water and wastewater bill last month that was $35 billion. In the negotiations with the White House, they increased the water and wastewater funding from the Senate's plan up to $72 billion. The White House has asked for 111 in the jobs plan. So they're getting a lot closer. 72 billion would be a whole lot better than 35. But let's be honest, 35 is more than we've had in our lifetimes, really since the Clean Water Act was passed. It would be unprecedented levels for infrastructure funding in water, wastewater. I think we're going to get a bill passed. I'm not confident it's going to happen before August break, but I think we'll have something before the fiscal year is up, in probably around the Labor Day timeframe where you'll see a finer infrastructure bill. If it happens sooner, that's fantastic. I'm just not overly confident.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions from our participants? If so, please unmute yourself and you can ask away. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. So again, David and John, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate this information and your knowledge. And we want to thank everybody out there for attending this webinar. We appreciate your support and look forward to providing more webinars like this one in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence mayors in the future. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and all the slides and support materials will be made available to our city's mayors. So if you have any follow-up questions after this session, please feel free to reach out to the city's initiative staff. In the meantime, I want to say have a great rest of your day, enjoy your weekend, and we hope to see all of you at our next webinar in September on utilizing your waterfront and transitioning your economies. So with that, again, just thank you to our presenters, thank you to our mayors, and we really appreciate all of you for joining us today. And good luck, and we'll hopefully be seeing some fundings coming to our communities to help with our projects.
Thanks, Mayor.
So,
Thank you,
Yep.
Great
Mayor.
to see you, Jim.
all right, thank you, everybody. Enjoy your day.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.